Hi, everyone. Welcome to Retire with Style. I'm Wade. I'm here with Alex. Hey, Alex. And we're joined this week by Daniel Crosby, PhD, Dr. Daniel Crosby, who's the Chief Behavioral Officer at Orion. You may remember the name Orion, I think, from the very early days of the podcast. We've had some folks from Orion on the podcast before. That's a company that works with financial advisory firms to really provide all the back office and software and structure and support. But we're happy to have Daniel here today as the Chief Behavioral Officer, who has a new book out, The Soul of Wealth, 50 Reflections on Money and Meaning. And we actually were first going to talk about that book, but we're going to make a two-part episode, or two episodes, I should say, with Daniel. First, to just get his thoughts on what's going on with the financial markets right now, because that's really his specialty, how to think about, from a behavioral perspective, market volatility. And then next week, we'll get into a deep dive with The Soul of Wealth, 50 Reflections on Money and Meaning. So we now have two PhDs in psychology. I'm the one left out of the group here between Alex, Daniel, and myself. So I kind of hand the floor over to Alex to talk about things with Daniel. Thanks for having us. Thanks for being on the show, Daniel.
My pleasure, guys.
Hey, Daniel. Yeah, I really appreciate you jumping on. And as we were saying right before this, the timing couldn't have been better, although in retrospect, that's kind of a weird phrase to say because we've been down 15, 20%. There's good news and bad news. No. But that being the case, Daniel, the last few episodes, I did my version of me putting on the Daniel Crosby hat and doing my, tap dancing around what's going on with the markets, volatility, and reactions. But we're very fortunate that we had you in queue, frankly, for the podcast. And we'd be remiss not to get your thoughts on the markets, not necessarily, obviously, what's happening now and forecasting what's going to happen next, but what we could be doing as investors in terms of the next best possible step and how to digest this information in a manner that doesn't give us bouts of insomnia, if you will. I'm sure we've been speaking to clients. I'm sure you have been in code red, having phone calls throughout with advisory firms, how they should be speaking. And, this podcast is largely consumers. And I think we'd be doing them a great service if we get into what to be thinking about right now. And I don't have many questions other than listening to you and going off of those.
So, Alex, it's funny. I'm gonna say something I probably shouldn't hear right out of the gate. But you talked about insomnia.
There you go.
I got up last night. To pee. Let's be honest. I got up to go to the bathroom, and I checked my phone to see what time it was, and the bond market was going crazy. I mean, the bond market was looking very abnormal. And then I had the hardest time going to bed, and I was up every 2 hours, and I was up at 4:30. So I'm dealing with insomnia today. So the first thing that I want to say is, if you've been rattled by this, the pros get rattled too. Like, I think we need to sort of normalize that. Like, yeah, this is scary. I think we as financial professionals sometimes do a lot of hand waving and trying to talk people out of feeling what they're feeling, but it is scary. Like, it's discomforting to see your portfolio go down. It's hard to see your hard-earned cash go, be diminished for things that are out of your control. But, one of the things that I mourn about my job is that I have to keep my finger on the pulse of financial markets, and the listeners of this show do not. And I think in a lot of ways that you would be better off if you did less of that, or at least you did it in a more educated way. So, Alex, we're both shrinks. We had some of our shrink paraphernalia we were just comparing there.
Wait, whose was bigger?
Yeah.
Yeah, you have the same chronology.
That was very Freudian of you, Alex.
Is that a cigar? No, go on.
But one of the things, one of my first rotations when I was in grad school was at an eating disorder clinic, and one of the things that has always stuck with me was the first bit of training we did wasn't around nutrition counseling or talk therapy or anything else. It was teaching the young women we worked with to be informed consumers of media. and inform consumers of the way that sort of the beauty industrial complex marketed to them and tried to make them feel bad and used, crash dieting and weird lighting and airbrushing and all these things to sell something. All of those same things are at play for consumers today and consumers of financial news media. So if you can avoid the financial news altogether, which I cannot, sadly, I would say to do it. But insofar as you are going to be keeping abreast of what's going on, I think you got to stay conscious of motive, right? Like what's being sold here. You got to stay conscious of the background of the person giving the information. I was watching a news channel the other day at the gym. I won't say which one. They had a wrestler on talking about the economy. And it's like, wow. So we're taking our cues from professional wrestlers now?
Hey, have you seen the Nature Boys portfolio? You'd think twice. You'd think twice, right, Wade? And Wade's a big time wrestling fan, so I think you're treading on very, very dangerous waters now. Going after Wade's heroes.
Wade, is this true?
Yeah, Wade, give him some drop some knowledge on your wrestling acumen here.
Yeah, that's a whole different topic. But no, the Nature Boy Ric Flair, I think, has not really saved his money, so he doesn't have a portfolio. But
no, is it true that you're big into wrestling?
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
He knows like names that you would be like, what?
I'm not taking financial advice from professional wrestlers. I will say.
So I have gravely misjudged and need to have my PhD in psychology revoked for being a poor judge of character. But yeah, I think we need to be very thoughtful about our media diet. Like as a first step, I think we need to be very thoughtful about our media diet. Are we doom scrolling? Are we more immersed in it than we need to be? This is going to be a long time coming. We just hit a 90-day pause on the tariffs. Like we'll see if it's actually 90-day pause. But, even that 90 days, there's going to be a lot of uncertainty, a lot of back and forth. And I think people would be wise to, leave the media at arm's length to the extent possible. And if you're going to consume media, be thoughtful about the messaging, understand that high emotion is used to sell stuff and sell movements, sell an agenda, be cognizant of that emotional messaging and be thoughtful about the messenger. So that's sort of my first caveat there, is to be thoughtful about what you're putting in your mind at a time like this.
What about if someone were to say, yeah, but Daniel, there's going to be a complete restructuring of global trade if things go along the lines of what we're talking about? You're asking me to pretty much put my head in the sand and check in whatever, 6 months. I'm not saying, I agree with it, disagree, or anything like that with my comment that I made just now. I'm just playing devil's advocate a little bit. How would you respond to someone listening saying, yeah, but not really?
Yeah, so it's interesting. It's hard for us to think this way because we think that more is more, right? We think that more is more, but there are certain domains where more information leads to impoverished decision making. We actually see this in markets, right? That the amount of information people consume is inversely correlated with their performance. We see this sometimes in sports betting, right? People who have 2 or 3 pieces of information about sort of the basics of the offense, of the defense of a team, make better decisions than people who have 90 bits of information about that team, because it becomes hard to weight what matters and what doesn't. You pair this with the political motivations of the two parties, the fact that we're more partisan than we've been basically ever, and the fact that everything is always being spun and pitched, right? And it becomes very hard to figure out what matters. And so I think that there are a few timeless truths. Like diversification is a timeless truth. That's not going anywhere. We can always be sure that we're going to own the thing that's going to do best, and let's be honest, let's do worst in the next market cycle. But figuring out the particulars of what global trade restructure is going to look like, or if it's even going to happen, is just a fool's errand. And it's one of these things because most places in life more gets you more. You read more books, you're smarter, you lift more weights, you're stronger, you watch more financial news, you are worse off, the literature suggests. And it's a weird thing to get your head around, but it's true.
No, 100% agree with that. I mean, I watch it, but I watch it almost for current events and to get a sense of what clients are listening to.
Mm-hmm.
So then we can kind of quote unquote objection handle right away before things are asked, or so we can be out in front of it. But to your point, I mean, listen, what's the signal and what's the noise? And over the next 90 days, I think you're going to be overwhelmed with noise versus signal. News is coming in randomly, and it is what it is. In a few episodes ago, we did a thing. We looked it up very quickly, but just to give you a sense of how crazy things are, from 2015 to 2025. Wait, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going to guesstimate here roughly, but the Dow Jones returned about 24,500 points net up. It was up over that period, 24,500 points. This is a loaded question, what I'm about to ask you. So to get to that 24,500 points in absolute points, and what I mean by that, if it goes up 500 points one day and down 500 points the next, that's 1,000 points. Mm-hmm. All right, even though it netted zero. So to net 24,500 points, what do you think was the absolute number of points it moved, between 2015 to 2025? This is a loaded question, so you assume it's going to be a high number. It is a high number.
Yeah, it's going to be a big number. I mean, we flipped from red to green 15 times today before lunch.
Yeah, exactly. So imagine how many points it moved, right?
Yeah.
And so I'll spare you the mystery here. It moved 490,000 points.
Yeah.
To get to a net of 24.5. That's like a 20-to-1 ratio.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about it. It moves 20 absolute points to get to 1. Mm-hmm. Their whole 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing, whatever. It really is 20. It's just crazy in terms of the amount of movement it needs. And you're getting this to the extreme over the next, you had it over the last 2 weeks, and I'm sure it's not going to stop over the next, 90 days. What would you tell somebody that's viewing the markets today, looking for signal and saying, oh, okay, we hit a bottom because it's, the NASDAQ, I think, was up 10%. The Dow is up 5+%. The Russell 2000 is up 9+%. What would you kind of suggest to them if they're finding extreme relief in today's movement from the standpoint of, okay, we're out of the woods, or they're trying to find signal in that?
Yeah. Well, far be it from me to ruin someone's good day, but
leave it to me, Daniel. Leave it to me. Don't worry about it.
I will say a couple of things about this. Alex, you and I talked about this before. You said it in slightly different words than I wrote about it in my book, but it's very much the same message. In every market, good, bad, and in between, the truest words in investing are "this too shall pass." Right? And the thing that I love about that phrase is that in times of exuberance, it chastens us. It should make us more humble to say, like, look, I mean, the last 2 years have been incredible. We got 25% a year. Yeah, for the last 2 years. And you have to, even as you're enjoying those nice returns and seeing that account grow, you have to tell yourself, look, this isn't normal. This isn't how it usually is. And then when we, reach low points like we were at earlier today, you have to remind yourself, like, look, things will tick back up as they most certainly have here, at least in the short term. The thing that I think about, though, that is so difficult for people is uncertainty. When you look at the psychology of uncertainty, we hate it more than even bad news. If you think about someone who's receiving a medical diagnosis, someone who's like getting a cancer diagnosis, the point of maximum stress, they've measured this, the point of maximum stress is not when they get the news that you have cancer or even terminal cancer. That is not the point of maximum stress. The point of maximum anxiety is when you're waiting for the biopsy. Like, you think something may not be right, you're waiting to get the results back. And that's where we are today with this new 90-day pause, is we've got a quarter effectively of uncertainty to deal with. Now, when you look at how people deal with uncertainty, they often do one of a couple of things, right? They'll just sort of rip the Band-Aid off, like forget it. I don't want to have to think about it. Let's go to cash, is sort of one extreme. Another extreme is sort of these forecasts and go, oh, this is the art of the deal. And I understand exactly what's happening, and sort of having an over optimistic and an overconfident view that you know exactly how it's going to play out. And I would suggest to you that the truth is somewhere in the middle, right? You can't just assuage that anxiety by selling everything and going to live in the woods, and neither do you know perfectly, the moves of two global superpowers duking it out here and trying to come to some very complicated decisions. So the truth, like most things, is that middle place that's a little messy and a little hard to sit with, but it's important to sit with.
Now, what are some things folks can do to sit with that in a little more calming manner?
Yeah. So one thing, sometimes, Alex, the research into psychology, the solutions seem remarkably simple. I call these River Jordan problems in my book. It's from the biblical story. There's a man with leprosy, Naaman, in the Bible. He goes to the holy man and he says, "Hey, you cure me of leprosy." And the holy man goes, "Hey, go bathe in the River Jordan and you'll be good." And Naaman goes, "What the heck? Like, that's not even a nice river." And his servants come back to him and say, "Hey, look, if he had asked you to do something tough, you would have done it. Just go bathe in the river and see if it works." And he does, and it works. A lot of times we're that, because one of the most profound things that we can do is literally sleep on it. Like, I published a podcast today that cited research that showed that people who waited 48 hours between sort of a stimulus, feeling anxiety, that 48-hour wait between feeling that negative feeling about your money and then acting on it in a way that's counter to your plan, they made dramatically better decisions than people who sort of impulsively followed the plan. That's not a sexy piece of advice to sleep on it, but it is empirically valid, and it's been shown time and time again to work. Other thing I would say, go ahead.
No, I was good. That reminds me of something. I don't know. I took it from somewhere. It could very well have been yourself. It's from the Appointment in Samara. No, just kidding. I had to throw that one in there. No, it was about when you question yourself, like, are you making the best decision? Will you regret this decision 10 minutes from now?
Yep.
Will you regret it 10 months from now? Will you regret it 10 years from now? And I think that's a little bit in line with what you're saying, in the sense of have a little detente, take a breath. And even though you may have an immediate relief right now from that anxiety, the valence of the anxiety you're going to have 10 months from now for making that decision is going to cost you.
Yeah, that's a great exercise. Another one that I like to do with folks who come to me and are very worried is I say, I don't push on it directly, because again, that worry is natural. Like, I feel it.
Yeah, exactly.
But I say, hey, what advice are you giving to your kids? Or what advice would you give to someone else? Because a lot of times you'll find, people, my kids are asking me, and the market has gotten bad enough that my kids kind of know that something's going on, and they say, "Hey, what's going on in the market? What are you doing?" And I go, "Oh, hey, no, don't worry about it. Just keep buying. Like, you wait it out. These things come and go." A lot of times we give much better advice to other people than we give to ourselves. So another thing that I always encourage people to do is, like, think about, what would you tell a stranger? What would you tell, what would you tell your kid or a loved one to do? That's probably better advice than following whatever's in your head.
It's interesting, though. That reminds me of, like, in the last week's episode, we spoke about that sort of the mindfulness model. Mm-hmm. When we got into that sort of recognize, allow, investigate, and non-identify with that. And I think the non-identify with that is kind of analogous to what you're saying, like, how would you speak to your kids? Because by default, where you're kind of doing, if you use a process like that, the mindfulness, you're externalizing the feeling, and you're also saying it's okay to feel that way. There's nothing wrong with it. It would be rational for you to be somewhat anxious. We're not like, the market volatility, think of it as kryptonite. Yeah, you're going to be tested. And it's one of those things that if you step outside of yourself and become and be on the outside looking in, I think you ready yourself for making better decisions in the same manner that you're comfortable telling your kid, "Hey, look, don't worry about it," because you're automatically externalizing the advice.
Yeah, I think it pays to think back on your own personal history. I mean, Here we are in 2025 going through this. 2022 was brutal. Like 2022 was rough. 2020 was really, really rough.
Apocalyptic, if
Yeah.
you will. It
Yeah.
really was.
Think back. Think back. If you're honest with yourself, unless you're just far less neurotic than I am, right? Like, if you're honest with yourself, there was a moment in 2020 where I think we were all like, oh, geez, this is bad.
When you started seeing like forest animals go into the city,
Yeah.
when you started seeing video clips like that, you're like, wow, right? Weren't you like, oh my goodness, like when we were gonna solve global warming in 2 months because everyone shut down everything and no
Yeah.
energy was being like used. You were like, wait a second, what the heck is going on here?
I watched the whole documentary on the rewilding of certain
Oh,
places.
really?
Yeah, during COVID, because it's like, yeah, when we've all been shut in our house for a year and the animals are taking back over, maybe we should panic. And yet, look at what the market's done between then and now.
Not
So
like that.
I think it pays to revisit times in your own personal history where you felt like this before, and then what do I wish I had done then? Do that now.
Absolutely. And I mean, look, in '08, that's when you had the big financial crisis. And to me, one of the main stools, the legs of capitalism, which was, money flows where it needs to be, that kind of thing, that pretty much dried up completely. Right. And so that's not, markets go up, markets go down, don't worry about it. That was like, look, there's something inherently, potentially, systematically going on here with capitalism that will need a rejiggering. Right.
Yep.
That was bad, from that standpoint. This, I mean, you can make the case global trade, this and that, but right now it's not even close to being anything like that. And yeah, if you really think about it, we made it through that, and you made it through that through discipline. And so the trick here is trying not to sound like you're just full of platitudes, really, because it's one of those things, because it could sound patronizing at some point, but it still doesn't make it any less correct. That's what you should be doing, which is just maintain your discipline and go from there.
Well, Jason Zweig, the sort of the famed writer, the famed financial writer who's with the Wall Street Journal for a long time, he talks about, I'm going to misquote him here, but he says basically my whole job is to say the same 2 or 3 things over and over again in different ways, and tell new stories that it's a little difficult, right? I mean, it gets a little difficult to say, but
you and I spoke about it right before the podcast, right before we hit record. Remember, we were like, okay, this is the trick.
Yeah.
Right?
Doesn't make it any less true. I mean, we've it's been
the Cars did it through like 5 albums, the same song 20 times. So I think we can manage here.
Yeah, it's good enough for Green Day, right?
Yeah, exactly. Violent Femmes, go down the list. It's really the same song.
Yeah. I mean, they've looked now in 19 different countries, and the more you look at your portfolio, the worse you do. The more you trade, the worse you do. I mean, this is like in every country where it's looked at, and it's monotonic, right? So we'll use that word on the podcast. It's stepwise, and if you divide it into deciles, the most active decile to the least active decile, it just steps down, and the less you do, the better you do. And we
prefer to use scaffolding on this podcast.
Thank you.
Right?
Well, I will note that.
We prefer scaffolding, but we'll let it go. Or iterative, whatever. Successive approximations. How's that?
Yeah.
But I'll leave this for this final thought that I think will make a good transition for the Soul of Wealth, frankly. Yeah, at the end, our messaging is, look, it's very difficult to fight the inherent biases that we have and the like. And if you're only listening to this for 40 minutes or what have, by no means do we think this intervention is going to change behavior that you live with 24/7 for years and years on end. But we do think having a framework to work within is something that's effective. And for us, we always fall back on, okay, the market's like this. How is the financial plan? Because it helps fight against certain dynamics that you inherently have, right? Such as, when you backcast, when you begin to effectively have more of a rules-based system in place, when you start thinking about things in your future self, externalizing it like that, that tends to really ground you. And it serves as a nice again, counterweight to anxious behaviors that are going to be maladaptive ultimately. How do you feel about that from the standpoint of the benefit of having a framework via a financial plan? And then obviously, I think that opens up the whole avenue for the soul of wealth from a holistic standpoint.
Yeah, I wrote a whole book. I wrote a whole book on why you should just automate everything, basically. I mean, the systems and processes just beat discretion. I mean, we are wired to do this wrong. And the way that we are wired and the things that feel most natural to us, capital markets fly in the face of all our wiring. We're wired for immediacy, right? We're wired for immediacy, and capital markets take patience. We're wired for certainty. Capital markets, especially this one, are full of uncertainty. We're wired for immediate gratification. In capital markets, you go, hey, you have to set it aside for a rainy day and hope that it's more than it is today. So I mean, every sort of natural human tendency we have runs counter to the best practices. And the two best ways I know are automation and systematizing your process, and working with an advisor. These are the two best things that you can do, I think, because you get that automation, but you also get that encouragement. And when you pair those things together, I think you have something really powerful.
All right. Well, that's great, Daniel. And thank you for, again, this was an impromptu session, simply because the timing of this was uncanny relative to what was happening in the markets. And we had a few episodes on just how to digest this from an emotional standpoint. And what a way to put a bow on it with you giving your 2 cents, if you will. I mean, I don't think we could have done any better. So I really appreciate the time to really speak about this. And I think it'll be a good segue into actually thinking about your wealth and the value behind that and how to align all of that with the book Soul of Wealth.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Wait,
Right.
You want to sign us off?
I was just taking that all in. Thank you, Daniel, and we'll catch everyone next time on Retire with Style. We'll have Daniel Crosby, PhD, back again with us to talk about his book, The Soul of Wealth: 50 Reflections on Money and Meaning. So you may have a chance with that week notice to get a copy of the book, and you'll be more informed for the podcast next week. Catch you next time on Retire with Style.